across the globe. We have 3 speakers for you, and they're going to tackle questions including what does it mean to be a citizen? What are the rights and responsibilities of citizens? What are human rights, and what is the connection between human rights and citizenship? And to what degree is the process of citizenship respectful of human rights? We will first hear from Kerrie Smith, who is Associate Professor in the Sociology and Anthropology Department at Millersville University. Then we'll hear from Audrey Lopez Valdivia, and she works at Church World Service as the Citizenship and Integration Legal Counselor. And then we'll hear from Bagchi, who is Assistant Professor in Political Theory and American Politics at Millersville.
Hi, can you all hear me? Yep. Okay, great. Dr. Lawrence is being difficult because that's what political scientists do. All right, let me tell you how happy I am to be here to talk about this. Today, citizenship has been a lived experience and a master status for me from the moment I was born. Some of my students are here, and some of you have heard this story, but I'm the child and grandchild of refugees and exiles. My father was an ethnic Chinese living in 1960s Indonesia. For those of you who know about Indonesian politics during that time, it really was not feasible for him to remain in that country, and he had to leave in the middle of the night with all his belongings. My mother's father, my maternal grandfather, was both being simultaneously recruited by the communist and the socialist and the nationalist army in China. And so he decided to pack up and leave as well. And so a large part of my family history is consisted of people who have really no place to call their own, at least not recognized by any nation. So let me start by telling you about the perspective I'm coming from. I read a book by Richard Bellamy where he argues that citizenship is a kind of political right. So if you are a citizen, you have an entitlement to participate in a community on an equal basis with your fellow citizens, and I quote, in making the collective decisions that regulate social life. We just had an earlier panel here about the importance of electoral politics and voting, which was truly inspiring. And he argues that this is what we should think about when we think about citizenship. We should think about the political rights that citizenship confers on people. And he argues, in fact, that expanding citizenship so much, and I quote, that it comes to encompass people's rights and duties in all their dealings with others potentially obscures the important and distinctive role as a specific kind of political relationship. No offense to the political scientists sitting in the audience and my fellow panelists here, I disagree with him deeply. I'm going to argue with you today that we do need to expand our understanding of what citizenship is, and I'm going to propose today that we need to look at how citizenship is lived and experienced in people's everyday lives in order to really understand what that's like. This is not a new idea. Anthropologist Danielle Cherubini has actually done a study of migrant women's experiences in Andalusia and said that we need to really consider the way that people live have been affected by immigration laws and immigration policies. The example she gives in the study she did was how non-immigrants, non-EU migrant women to Andalusia have made decisions to, for instance, legally get married because of what policies require them to do, when in fact women might have made another decision to cohabit or to simply have more fluid relationships in addition to getting married. Evelyn Nakano Glenn, who was the president of the American Sociological Association in 2010, in her presidential address said to us that we need to, quote, focus on lived citizenship, to think about how lived citizenship can also differ based on local arrangements that people make. She talked about her own family history in 1921. In 1921, the California legislature passed legislation allowing school districts to establish, get this, separate schools for children of Japanese, Chinese, and Mongolian parentage. And it also required rural districts to provide transportation for school children. And Dr. Glenn's mother recalled that the bus driver would pick up all the kids along a route. He would stop off at the white school and then order all the Asian kids to get off the bus. And they would have to walk an additional mile to their school. Now, it's irrelevant whether the bus driver decided to do this himself or whether this was a state law. The reality is the impact on those children of being treated this way and being told you have to walk an extra mile to school is undeniable. And so what I want to spend the rest of my time here talking about today is the lived experience of what it's like to live as a citizen and to experience these little microaggressions in your daily interactions with people. And I'm going to use parts of my life as example, right? The idea of microaggressions is from a psychologist, actually, and he argues that what these are, and I quote, brief everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages to certain individuals because of their group membership. Constant and continuing everyday reality of slights, insults, invalidations, and indignities visited upon marginalized groups by well-intentioned, moral, and decent family members, friends, neighbors, co-workers, students, teachers, clerks, waiters and waitresses, employers, healthcare professionals, and educators. The key is that these are perpetrated by well-meaning people, moral people. Okay. What are some examples of microaggressions living in between and betwixt a citizenship experience? Well, I'll tell you that one of the key things is the way in which non-citizens are singled out and marginalized in different ways. When I was a child, because my father was a refugee, I was not able to get citizenship in Singapore where I grew up, so I had my mother's citizenship. This marked me out as a non-citizen of the place where I was born and raised. And if you were a non-citizen in Singapore at that time, you had to pay a minimal fee for going to public school every month, which was $10 a month. But here's how it was done. At the beginning of every month, I had to walk up to the teacher in front of all the other students to hand in that amount of money. And I was the only student who had to do that, and that marked me out. I am now 38. I still have not forgotten what that experience is like. I would like to tell you. The kind of terminology we use to describe non-citizens. For a very long time, I was filing tax income forms stating that I was a resident alien. That does not make anybody feel good, unless you're really into sci-fi, you know, just the resident alien, right? Now I'm an American citizen. I find that I am not an American citizen like everyone else. When I talk to people, people ask me, oh, you're a naturalized citizen. You're not a real citizen who was born here. You are somebody who's naturalized. And for those of you who know your American government well, you will know that even though I have now all the rights of American citizens, there is one right I do not have. And what right is that? To run for president of the United States, because I was not born here. And I want you to know I aced my citizenship exam. So, okay. Airport lines. When you come back through the United States, you are split up. Even if you are one family, I was married to an American citizen, you are split up into different lines. Even young children whose parents may not have the same citizenship as them, think about how frightening that is for a 5-year-old child to be split up at a custom line, okay, and go through different lines. I have spent a lot of time at immigration offices. I have always been treated personally with kindness and respect, but I have also seen immigration officers treat immigrants and applicants horribly and terribly because they have the power. You need them. They don't need you. And it's some of it borders on abusive, quite frankly. I will tell you the story at Memphis immigration. There is a big sign there. You all know that we have something called a green card if you're a permanent resident, right? And there's a big sign there that says, when we tell you to bring out your green card, it's the card that is pink. I don't know if you all know this. A green card is not green, it's pink. And I used to say to my husband, this is why they think immigrants are stupid. Because they make laws that don't make sense, right? So take out your pink card, which is really the green card. And then we go, what do you mean? And we are treated like we're stupid people because the laws don't make sense. Second form of microaggression that I've experienced a lot is this automatic assumption that if you come from a different country, you must be lacking in skills and abilities automatically. To apply to come to college in this country, you are asked to take something called TOEFL, Test of English as a Second Language. It's a foreign language, actually, in the old language, which I believe I was okay with at the time. You know, you want to make sure people who are coming to college can take this test. By the way, this test is ridiculously easy, just so you know. Here's what's insulting. When I graduated from college and was applying to graduate school, they made me take the test again. Yes. Not to brag, I have a 4.0 GPA. Why are you making me take this test again? Purely by the fact that I'm not a citizen, and I've been designated an international student. I grew up in a former British colony. We speak the Queen's English, okay? So, you know, I'm just telling you. Having to take a citizenship exam to prove that you know enough about this country. I'm very proud to do it. I'm happy I did it, you know, but it's a little embarrassing to go to immigration, be asked these 6 questions about American civics and government, and then be told, read this sentence out loud in English and write it in English for us to document that you have sufficient English skills. I have a PhD, I'm sorry, but I'm a social scientist, I have a doctorate, and you're testing me on basic facts about government civics when I spend most of my time, by the way, explaining to my students how to register to vote and why voting is important. Okay, so those are little microaggressions that add up. And in fact, it was an act of microaggression that got me to apply for citizenship because one day I was reading yet another article on a permanent resident who was being deported because she wasn't a citizen. And I finally said, that's it. You know, we're applying for this. By the way, applying for citizenship is not cheap. I estimate that I've spent about $3,000 in going through this very, very long process. I was debating whether to say this, but I will. Another aspect of microaggression is the vigilance and the self-monitoring that non-citizens often experience living in a different country. You all know about Show Me Your Papers legislation. I cannot tell you what that's like. I have to go everywhere with my wallet and with my identification before I became a citizen. And the day I became a citizen, it was the most uncomfortable feeling because for once I realized I didn't have to walk anywhere with papers. And it was very freeing. When 9/11 happened, it is a tragedy, it is horrific. But a lot of us, the first thought we had as non-citizens living in this country is, dear God, I hope whoever did this did not come from the same country I came from. And I don't think that's something that a lot of people realized, thinking about that. I pay attention to what's going on in foreign relations with China because it doesn't matter that I didn't grow up in China. And I have no relationship to China, but people will make comments to me on how you people are taking over the world, even though I have no connection to that whatsoever. There's constant self-monitoring of speech because I know Dr. Bagchi is going to talk about patriotism. You do not want to ever get accused of not being a patriot. And last I checked, First Amendment offers freedom of speech, right? I self-monitor that, okay? I also want to say something about the process of getting citizenship. When I got citizenship twice, my husband reminded me twice we had to do this. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this. You have to go for an interview to prove that, and I quote, in immigration language, your marriage was not entered into for purposes of visa fraud. I have to go prove that my marriage is a real marriage. Okay, I will tell you this and excuse my language, but by the way, the letter comes really fast. The letter shows up next week. You have to be in Philly to do this. So I had to rearrange my classes, take time off, and I told my colleagues, this is what's happening. I'm going to Philadelphia. One of my colleagues, Dr. Tim Trussell, looked at me and said, what do you mean? I said, well, I have to go prove that my marriage is not entered into for purposes of fraud. And Dr. Trussell looked at me and said, how do you do that? And I quote, do you just hump each other on the table? One of my other colleagues who was there at the time said, that doesn't prove she's married. That just proves she's easy. But think about the insult of having to go document. We have to answer questions. How did you meet each other? What attracted you to each other? You are asked to list family members' names. Nobody else I know has to do that, right? I also want to talk a little bit about the ways that we are pitted against each other. As a person who followed the legal system, and I told you how much it costs and how much time it takes, to then be pitted against people who are here, quote unquote, illegally or undocumented. And people say to me all the time, but you did it, quote unquote, the right way. Don't you want to reform this system? I happen to have the resources to do it, quote unquote, the right way. And I don't appreciate being pitted against other people who are also working very hard and are searching for the same things. This is not just from people in America. When I go back to Singapore, I get dismissed by people whom I've grown up with my whole life because they have now seen me as being a traitor and as selling out my citizenship. Okay, having to go back to Singapore, which I haven't done yet since I've got American citizenship, and having to walk through the line that now says foreign visitor is going to be quite emotional, I expect. Okay, here's the last piece of this. I converted to Judaism about a year and a half ago. Shuano, what? Ah, thank you, Toda Rabbah. And you are told to support Israel, the homeland of the Jews. And I do. I support Israel's right to exist. But this is what I've learned about supporting the state of Israel. I have a right of return to Israel as a Jew now, based on what the government says. However, the chief rabbinate of Israel will not recognize me as a Jew because I was converted with a Reform rabbi. I cannot be buried and married as a Jew in Israel. And yet you're asking me to support Israel unconditionally when you won't recognize me as one of your own. Now, this is a debate I have with my rabbi a lot. I taught religious school last year, and I explained this to the children in my class, and they said, it doesn't matter, we're going with you, and they will take you, which is very sweet. And let me wrap this up really quick. Why does this matter? This takes a huge physical, mental, emotional, psychological toll on people who have to deal with this every day, okay? For those of you who were at Joan Blake's talk, she brought up the point that from an evolutionary psychology perspective, people who are shunned or isolated die. That there is no other way to put it. And these kinds of little microaggressions really wear people down all the time. When I have to hear students make comments about immigrants, I have to remind my student, I am an immigrant to this country. I pay my taxes. It's the one I always hear, you all don't pay taxes. Actually, yes, I do. I pay more taxes probably than you do. Okay. I always like to end on a hopeful note because students tell me I'm always too negative. And here's the hopeful note. These are boundaries that are built up by people. And if these are boundaries that are built up by people, these are also boundaries that people can tear down. Exactly. And what needs to happen is not just for us, people who are quote unquote naturalized citizens, to become part of the community, but for the larger community to accept us and to truly integrate us. I don't have a blue plan for you. I don't know how we do this, but I think having a conversation is a beginning step to do this. So that's my hope, and my question is for all of us to think about how we start being aware of these kinds of microaggressions that we enact towards each other on a daily basis. So that's my talk for today. I'm going to turn it over next.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So, my name is Audrey Lopez. I work for a Church World Service Immigration and Refugee Program. We're in Lancaster City, 308 East King Street. I currently coordinate the Citizenship and Integration Program, which is a program that is funded by the Department of Homeland Security. We get a grant, 2-year grant, to help people who are permanent residents become citizens, okay? So this ranges from screening them, make sure they're eligible for citizenship, enrolling them in citizenship classes where they get the help of studying for the history, studying for the geography, making sure they pass the interview, they're writing their English, reading the English, speaking the English, all of this. And then at the end of the class, if they finish, then they get the legal service, which is me helping them fill out the citizenship application for free, okay? And then we do all the follow-up that is necessary up until that point where they go to that oath ceremony and become citizens, okay? So that's what I do on a daily basis. In my office, I have clients from Morocco, Iraq, Colombia, Honduras, Kazakhstan, India, China, Nepal, Burma, you name it, they've been to my office, okay? And this is on a daily basis. And I found that because of my background, that's why I've been asked to come here to talk to you about US citizenship and also about human rights, because it is a human rights conference, okay? There is something enticing and virtuous about becoming a US citizen, okay? Everybody wants to be one. Okay, it's just that simple, okay? But I once made the mistake of asking one of my first clients, you know, in a very joking manner, nice manner, why do you want to be a US citizen? And he actually said to me, why wouldn't I want to be one, you know? And so that to me is indicative of like this desire that as soon as you step foot into this country, you want to become like you, okay, sitting right here in front of me. And I found that even though all of them, if not most of them, most of the permanent residents that I see on a daily basis, already abide and follow the responsibilities and rights of a US citizen, such as, you know, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, following the laws, paying taxes, local, federal, state laws, and paying taxes. We do, we pay taxes, okay?
Let's repeat that again. We pay taxes.
Yes. And even though they all already abide by these and already get these little, well, not even little, like quirks or rights or responsibilities, then if you already get these, why become one? You know, what's the incentive? So really, these permanent residents, they already act and react like US citizens, but they lack that certificate of naturalization, okay? They lack that US passport. Then why become a US citizen? You know, why? I can tell you the reasons can be very noble or very simple, okay? Some permanent residents come around election time and they say, I want to vote. I just want to be able to vote for president or my congressman or my representative. Okay, that's easy enough, let's do it, okay? Some of them want to be able to bring their relatives from abroad because currently permanent residents can only bring a spouse or a child who's unmarried, even if that child is over 21 years old. You know, if you're a US citizen, you enjoy a longer qualifying list of relatives. You can bring your brothers, your sisters, your parents, anybody really, well, not cousins or aunts or uncles, even though I've been asked this question several times, okay? And also, it's a risk staying abroad for a long period of time if you're a permanent resident. There might be trouble when you try to come in through the port of entry. They might say, well, you've been outside of the US for more than 8 months. What's up with that? Why did you go there? Where did you go there? What were your reasons? And you can actually lose your residency. They can take it away from you if you stay outside of the United States for long periods of time. And then the most practical one, and only a couple of clients have actually come to me and said, I just don't want to be deported because I was illegal here for 10 years and I know what that feels like. And now I have the right to not be deported. So I want to be able to say, you can't touch me, okay? You know, you really can't have a certificate of naturalization now. So they range from very noble to very simple, okay? And there also seems to be this underlying belief that US citizens have more rights, okay? Let's explain that. Okay, so I also deal with undocumented immigrants who come to my office because we not only do citizenship applications, but we also do family petitions and maybe deferred action. How many of you know what deferred action is? Okay, I'll explain that in a little while. So we get undocumented immigrants, permanent residents, we get U.S. citizens, okay? And these undocumented immigrants, for some reason, they don't have any lawful status in this country, okay? And that to them transfers into, I don't have any rights in this country because I like a green card, I like a driver's license, I like a social security card, and therefore, I don't have any rights, okay? So this notion that human rights, universal human rights, are inalienable, that no one can take them away, that you're born with them, they're absolute, is completely inapplicable to the undocumented immigrant. Like, he or she just cannot wrap his mind around that, okay? So the right to work, the right to education, the right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, equality before the law, to the undocumented immigrant, this is discretionary and bound to change according to the laws of this country. And I can tell you this because I'm guilty of this myself. I am an undocumented immigrant. I came to this country 12 years ago. My parents and I overstayed our visa, okay? And thankfully last year I got deferred action, which in a nutshell, it's this 2-year written promise by the Department of Homeland Security that says, you know what, you're a low priority case, we took your fingerprints, you pay the fees, you went through the application process, and we don't find you to be a high priority case, so we're just not gonna deport you for the next 2 years, okay? But it's only for 2 years. So after 2 years, what happens, who knows, I'll let you know, okay? But the thing is, even I, who, when I graduated college, I consider myself pretty educated. I graduated top of my class in high school, graduated university with honors, okay? Even I sat on my junior year of college at this human rights class that Professor Bookmiller was teaching at the time. And she explained to me, well, to all of us, what human rights were. And I sat there looking at her, I'm like, yeah, right, this doesn't apply to me. What do you mean? Like, equality before the law? Okay, yeah, okay, I believe you. And then I analyzed, right? I said, okay, well, let's think about this logically. My right to work. Okay, so I can work here, just illegally in this country. So really that right hasn't been taken away from me because I can work, right? The right to education, depending on states and which state you live in now, if you're undocumented, you can go to school, at least high school. And then college is a little bit more iffish, but I managed to pay for college. So I found a way out that way. So my right to education was never violated either. Right to life, check. Okay, so freedom of expression, check. Freedom of religion, check. I can go to whatever church I want, practice whatever religion I want, okay? So all these rights, human rights, even though I lack status, have always been there. They have never been violated from a very simplistic point of view, okay? So even I, who was educated, believe this, that I had no rights in this country, definitely no human rights, and forget the US Constitution, it doesn't apply to me. So it's just this way of thinking that it's gonna take a long time to change that because we do have rights despite of lack of legal status, okay? Not a lot of undocumented immigrants will know this. So they're required, you know, we need to talk to them and figure out like, these are your rights, you have rights just like any other US citizen, even though you lack status in this country. So not many countries are this gracious to even its own citizens, okay? So I'm thankful enough to be here, black status, and be able to say, you know what, I received an education, I can work, I'm not deportable for at least the next 2 years. I can actually say this, and it's because it's America. I mean, so I could remain like this forever, okay? I could say, I'm just gonna live my life in 2-year increments. But I tell you this, on a daily basis, I help 2 to 3 people become citizens, okay? And it's ironic how life works out because someday I would like to say, you know, I want to fill out my own citizenship application one day because I pop this out like pills, you know, like one next after the other, one after the other, one after the other, and like when am I going to get the chance to do that for myself? And I can tell you this because I go through the process of helping somebody become a citizen through every single step of the way. And the citizenship path is a difficult one, okay? So let's start with the fee. Professor mentioned that she spent about $1,000, okay? $3,000, okay. So just the citizenship application is $680. That's money you don't see, if you manage to misspell Lincoln on your writing part of the test, that's it. They're not gonna return that money to you, okay? And what if you have to get all these documents, like birth certificates, marriage certificates, you know, how are you gonna get a birth certificate from Sudan? You're gonna have to pay a lot of money, plus DHL to get that here, okay? So it's money you have to spend, and not a lot of people have a lot $3,000 just laying around, okay?
With no attorneys, by the way. If you
Yes,
hire an
no
attorney,
attorneys.
that's
And if you,
even worse.
yeah, it's more money if you even hire an attorney. Okay, second, it's a 10-page application. Immigration wants to know every single thing you've done since you stepped foot into this country. Where you've worked for the past 5 years, where you've studied, where you've lived for the past 5 years, all the trips you've taken since coming to America. Who remembers that? Try asking an 80-year-old man from Honduras, where have you been 20 years ago? Did you go to Honduras? He doesn't remember. I don't remember. He threw out his passports long ago. So sometimes it becomes an issue because immigration wants to see those passports, okay? So it's difficult. And not to mention the questions. There's 39 questions on this application that are just bizarre and obscure. One of my favorite ones is, do you have a title of nobility in any foreign country?
Yes.
I ask that. Most of my clients just look at me and they're like, explain?
Title of nobility.
Title of nobility. And so then I say, simply put, are you a queen? Are you a king? Are you a duchess in, Cuba, Ghana, Morocco? Tell me now. This is the time to tell me. And then, of course, and I kid you not, 8 times out of 10, they always say to me, well, if I was, I wouldn't be here. Okay? And so it's just like, all right, I need a yes or no. That's it. Yes or no. No jokes here, because immigration might or might not ask those questions. And then also one of my favorite ones is between March 23rd, 1933 and May 18, 1945, where you have ever a member or associated in any way, directly or indirectly, with the Nazi government of Germany. Okay, some of these people that are coming, like say Somalia, they haven't had World War II history in their high school curriculum. They don't know what World War II is. Who are the Nazis? And so I have to go into a 5-minute synopsis of this is what World War II is. These were the Nazis. These were the Allies. This is what happened. Everybody's happy. Were you ever related in any way to this? And then he simply put, I wasn't born at that time. Okay, no, moving on. Okay, so it's 39 questions like that. Okay, they are just bizarre. And to somebody who's been here for 5 years, because you need to at least been here for 5 years in order to apply for citizenship, if you didn't marry a U.S. citizen, some of those people are still learning English. So try to explain habitual drunkard or illegal gambling. Like, I don't even know if there's a translation for gambling in whatever language I may be translating into, okay? So these questions are difficult. And aside from that, they have to learn the 100 civic and history questions that are gonna be asked, okay? They range from name Native American tribe in the United States, okay? Or which are the 2 longest rivers in the United States, okay? After that, some of these people are hearing the name Lincoln for the first time when they go over these questions, okay? It's difficult. They study hard and they have to pass that part. So I can see them sometimes walking down the street with the little flashcards. It's like studying, making sure they pass that interview. But aside from that, they must read an English sentence, write an English sentence, be able to answer all their personal questions in English. Some officers are more difficult than others. Some let go of grammar mistakes. They're like, okay, you put L before O in Lincoln, all right, that's all right, we'll just let it go. Some officers are like, no, that's not how it's spelled. And then you fail. And then you have to go through the process all over again, okay? So they are difficult, okay? Basically, what immigration does is just they put you under a microscope and they want to make sure that you're not a threat to society, that you've been here as long as you've been here, you're a good moral character, you're a good person, you haven't committed any crimes, and if you have, you need to let them know openly. So things like that. It's just, sometimes I'm like, why do you want to do this? It's difficult. It's a difficult process. But yet, in spite of all this, people want to become citizens. They want to be recognized as rightful citizens of this country with all the rights, duties, and responsibilities of U.S. citizens, even though they kind of already do, except they can't vote or ever become president, okay? Back home, they might not have had this option. Back home, they might not have been able to practice the religion they wanted or be a certain ethnicity, and so that's why they came to this country, to be who they are, to be who they want to be. And so the ultimate goal has always been become a U.S. citizen. Why come to America if you're not going to be one? It's just as simple as that. And so although civil and political rights, the right to liberty, the right to life, the freedom of religion, freedom of expression, right to equality under the law, right to self-determination, are all human rights, universal, we've always had them. People seem to forget that they had these to begin with, okay? that they are universal human rights. And so America is, after all, this country that has fought for all these rights at some point or another to be able to say to its citizens, you know, you can enjoy these rights. They're not universal, they're in our Constitution, okay? So people find that enticing. People want to be part of a country that already has this in writing, okay? One of my favorite clients, he was a Cuban client, came on a boat from Cuba, landed in Florida, has been here for about 30, 40 years as a permanent resident, and finally became a citizen last month. And he said to me, you know, in America, I can enjoy the rights that I did not have in Cuba. And so your home is my home now. And I said, sir, you know, we met 5 times already. Like, I have to tell you, like, I'm not an actual citizen, you know? Like, I can call him at home. I've been here for 12 years, but right now there's no legal way for me to become a citizen. And he said, don't worry, sweetie. Like, I'm one of them too, and I believe we want people like you, okay? So at that point, I mean, it was just like, oh, it broke my heart, and we were at his oath ceremony, so we were both crying at the end. But the point is, like, I was just glad to see that this man who had waited for so long, had come through so much, was finally able to say, you know, I'm a proud American citizen, and I can say that to you now, and I can show you that because I have an American passport now, okay? So I just want to say, if you walk away with anything from my little presentation today, is that you should be proud to be an American citizen, because not a lot of people can say that. And it's really, you hear it a lot, like, it's a great country to be in. I can assure you, it is, okay?
Okay, I'm going to take up from where Dr. Smith and Audrey left off. I have to disagree with Dr. Smith for 1 second. I was an alien for a while, just an alien. Then I progressed to being a resident alien. And I kind of felt bad when I lost it. It made me feel special, you know, kind of. Now I'm just a normal person, no longer an alien after I finished my naturalization process. But being an alien wasn't bad. I will say it's kind of hard to teach political science and go through a naturalization process. That, I think, was the most challenging part for me. One of my questions on when I took the citizenship exam was, who's the current president of the United States? Now, again, the test is hard. Generally, it's hard, but they try to throw you some softball sometimes because they think, well, you know, you may not know this. But for a person who teaches political science every single day, it's crazy to go to an exam and be asked, who's the current president of the United States, right? And so that was difficult. I still remember, I just completed this process last year. They asked me to write the sentence, where is Washington, D.C.? That was my sentence. I had to write that sentence in English to prove that I knew English. The entire time, I have, again, this sounds terrible, but I said to myself, why isn't the person interviewing me looking at me? She did not establish eye contact for an entire 30-minute interview, not once. And it made me wonder whether there was some instinctive view on her part that if she looked at me, that this personalizes the experience for her. I don't know. I didn't ask. I didn't want to. But it was a question in my mind because I've never had an experience where someone who's talking to me doesn't look at me, especially since we're sitting right across from each other, right? So citizenship, getting citizenship can be an extremely financially difficult, emotionally difficult, and in some ways just challenging process. And you know, as Audrey said, most people want to go through this for a reason. But because I teach political science, since I've gotten citizenship, I think I have been in a much more peculiar position than I ever thought I would be. And this is why I teach political theory. So one of the biggest questions in political theory right now is whether patriotism is a positive thing. This is something that Americans don't ask themselves. Patriotism is undoubtedly positive for Americans. if you're not patriotic, that's a bad thing, right? I mean, by definition, that means that you should not be a citizen or you should not get citizenship. But a lot of political theorists, American political theorists, I might add, point out that patriotism is by definition exclusionary. Because when you're patriotic, your mentality is us versus them. And that mentality can sometimes completely destroy the principles on which the country is based, right? So, as Audrey pointed out, the Declaration of Independence says that all men are created equal, right? Everyone has unalienable rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. But too much patriotism, and I don't know where that line is drawn, so I'm just going to say that right now. I don't know where you are too patriotic or not patriotic enough. But too much patriotism effectively means what you are saying is you are entitled to certain rights and they, whoever they are not, right? And this is where we get the language of both a curtailing of human rights and a curtailing of immigrant rights as well, right? So when you hear the immigration debate nowadays, what is the debate you hear? What is the language that people use? They are taking our jobs, right? Anyone who says they are taking our jobs has already made that mental leap between us versus them, right? They are not saying we want jobs for people. They are not saying our economy should grow. They are not saying any of these things. They are saying it's my job and how dare you, who is not a part of me, take it, right? And so a lot of political theorists point out that patriotism as a concept is problematic. It destroys the foundational principles on which this country is built. The foundational principles were meant to be inclusionary. Patriotism, by definition, can become exclusionary. I'm not saying it doesn't, that means that we shouldn't be patriotic. But here is basically the issue. When we are patriotic, we don't treat others as human beings. We define ourselves as human and others as not. And nationality becomes a moral characteristic. Now, of course, nationality is a political characteristic. We all know that. I mean, Audrey spoke about the rights you get when you're a citizen and what you don't. But is nationality a moral characteristic? Should we consider citizenship to be the basis of rights, human rights? And because people that propagate what political theorists call cosmopolitanism, cosmopolitans believe that nationality is a morally irrelevant characteristic, because nationality fundamentally means you don't treat people as equal, right? And so in order to see all people as human, cosmopolitans say we should think of ourselves as global citizens, citizens of the world, not citizens just of the country that you live in. Again, just to be clear, they don't say that we should all join one great world state. No, you're not getting rid of your country. You're not getting rid of your state or your feelings towards your state. But in their minds, cosmopolitan requires us to think beyond patriotism, beyond nationalism, right? And cosmopolitans point out that in this world, the world we have today, basically policy making has to be a global issue, right? Right now, Congress is, well, right now they're probably going to do something about the budget, hopefully. But if they are not doing anything about the budget, in 2 weeks they have to do something about the debt ceiling, right? Yes. But the debt ceiling is not just an American issue, right? If that debt ceiling is not raised, it becomes a global issue. The recession was not an American issue, it was a global recession, right? And so for cosmopolitanism says all problems now in this world are basically global problems. We need policy solutions, but they need to be global solutions. They can't be restricted to one country, to one race, to one ethnicity, to one group. no matter how you define that group, ethnicity, race, etc., right? And so effectively, the argument for cosmopolitanism is not simply a political argument. It's an educational argument. And this is where I'm going to bring it back to, broadly speaking, Millersville, but also the liberal arts, right? Cosmopolitanism says obviously you are citizens of the United States, you want to remain citizens of the United States, you love your country. That's fine. The problem is when you see others different from you because they are not citizens of the United States, right? Or they are not the right kind of citizens of the United States, right? Because we break these groups down further. It's not just citizens versus non-citizens. Within citizenship, you have the right kinds of citizens and the wrong kind of citizens, right? We have the citizens who deserve certain things because they've worked for it, and the citizens that don't deserve certain things because they haven't worked for it, right? We always break ourselves down to smaller and smaller groups and then identify with that. And the problem for cosmopolitans is that we should stretch our humanity outward instead of limiting it inward. Instead of making it small and identifying with small groups, we need to identify with larger and larger ones, right? Essentially a global population. And cosmopolitans believe that the best way to do that is global education, right? And a global education effectively for them means a liberal arts education, not an education, and Dr. Smith said she doesn't want to end on a negative note. So I'm going to say that one of the most positive things about this conference, and I think about Millersville and the liberal arts, is simply that. It teaches you that you are not insular. You are not in this world alone. Because I teach political science, I've been reading a lot of politics for the last few days. Obviously, there's a lot going on. And one editorial was talking about what he called an echo chamber, right? That politics sometimes creates an echo chamber where basically it's like being stuck in a room and hearing your voice over and over and over again, right? And what's the problem with that? If you hear yourself over and over and over again, what you effectively think is that you're the only voice, that your view is the view of everybody, right? And you see that in politics today. You have a person who voted for one person, and they can't imagine how somebody else could possibly win. And why is that? Because they say, well, I don't know anyone else who voted for that person. How on earth did they win? They must have won by fraud because nobody I know voted for him. Someday maybe her, right? And what's the answer to that person? You don't know the entire population of the entire country. You only know your friends and your family and your neighbors, and the likelihood is they think like you, right? And this echo chamber, I think, is not just true of politics today. I think this is true of the immigration debate as well, right? Because we think of immigrants as people like us versus people like them. And we talk to people like us, because why would we talk to them? That doesn't make any sense, right? And so when you talk to people like us, well, of course, we just reflect ourselves back to each other all the time. And so liberal arts takes us out of that. It forces us out of that. It forces us out of this echo chamber where we hear the same views over and over again. And cosmopolitans, and I think all teachers who teach the liberal arts will admit that it's very difficult. It's difficult on you, and it's difficult on your teachers, and it's difficult on any thinking person. It's very difficult to be told that things you believe in may or may not be true, that things you believe in may or may not be open to question. And it's hard for you, and we understand that, and it's hard for us. I often say this, I went to school, to a private school where you had all people from all different kinds of religions, right? So we had Hindus, we had Muslims, we had Christians of every kind. And that's basically made it impossible for me to come down on any one religion, because I cannot conceive every single one of those people think they are right. And I can't conceive of a world where only one fraction of that group is actually correct and the rest are wrong. And so liberal arts can have this effect on you where you can say, I can't make a definitive statement either way. And that's certainly the impact it's had on me, right? But it can also show you how big the world is, how wide, how different, and how inclusive, right? And so cosmopolitans argue for a liberal arts education for that reason. Having said that, I will admit this, there are problems with this idea of cosmopolitanism, right? Because after all, for us, it's much easier to be attached to a smaller number of things than a larger number of things, right? So it's much easier for you to be attached to your friends or your family or your neighbors or whatever than to be attached to a global community. I mean, can you even conceive of a global community? What does that look like? I'm not sure that I can actually conceive of the looks of a global community, let alone be attached to one, right? So it's difficult. It's very challenging. But having said that, can we be both global and national and local? Because certainly that's what we are trying to be. We are trying to be global in one sense, local in another, and obviously national in terms of patriotism. And cosmopolitans make the argument that you can be all three. Because you can have an understanding of what it requires to be global, but you can also have an understanding of what it is to be local. You live in the local all the time, right? And so ultimately, cosmopolitans believe that this principle, that you are a global human being, helps you appreciate your country more. It helps you appreciate your principles more. And it helps you hold your country to those principles, something that is less likely if you're blindly patriotic, right? Blind patriotism doesn't allow for fundamentally what a democratic regime should have, which is critique, right? A democracy is based on critique, and we don't critique ourselves if we are just fundamentally blindly patriotic. If we just say everything we do is right and everybody else who differs from us is wrong, what standard are you holding yourselves to? So cosmopolitans believe that it helps to be cosmopolitan. It makes you more patriotic in a better way, if that's possible, right? And you still have patriotism, but you have what the cosmopolitans would believe to be a mental change. Mentally, emotionally, in terms of empathy, you relate to people differently when you're a cosmopolitan than not just politically, but emotionally, right? And human rights, by definition, will be better protected in a world of cosmopolitans than it would be in a world of patriots. This is the fundamental point of cosmopolitanism, that human rights are better protected without blind patriotism, right? Because, I mean, any human rights violation becomes a violation of your rights, not somebody else's in a different world, in a different place that you don't care about, but your rights, because you are a human being as well, right? Which patriotism doesn't allow. As long as your rights are protected, why should you care about others? And so fundamentally, I think this is where we come to this question of patriotism. Patriotism, I think, is a good thing. I think most of us in some ways are patriotic. But patriotism is also limiting if it does not have a sustained questioning attached to it, right? And sometimes I think, especially because of the discipline I teach, that a lot of times people just accept the good without question. Unfortunately, even the bad sometimes without question. Because the bad may or may not apply to you, but the good unquestionably does. So I will stop here, and the only thing I will say is I find myself very lucky to have had a liberal arts education, and be able to think of these questions without considering myself a traitor to something or the other, right? And I'm very glad all of you came here to listen this early in the morning on a Friday to the talk. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for the panel members?
Oh, God. You can call. You're the moderator.
All right, so growing up, my mom, she was born in Jamaica, but I was born here in America. But one thing she always told me was never forget where you come from. So is that patriotic or is that not patriotic?
I don't think this has anything to do with patriotism. I think it's cultural, right? I mean, my mom says the same exact thing. I went to school in India, and when I went to school, I went to a school that spoke English. You were only allowed to speak English throughout school hours, right? And unfortunately, in her mind, I think in English. I say this all the time. I dream in English. I'm not very good with other languages. And my mother gets really upset. She says this all the
Yes.
time. She said, "You're going to forget where you came from," right? But I don't think that's about nationalism. I think it's about roots and culture. Because even within the United States, there are different people that come from different cultures and they still maintain their cultures without being un-American, right? So, I mean, I would say your mom's probably just worried about, passing along a family heritage, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for the panel?
Okay, so this isn't a question, but as a half Japanese citizen and an American citizen, at least until I have to give up one of those citizenships. But anyways, so at the airports, I would often go through the natives line either way. So if I was at a Japanese airport, I'd get through the Japanese line quick, and then in America, I'd get through the American lines quick. So it's a good thing, but I feel like maybe it shouldn't be a good thing, but to me it's a good thing because it gets me through the airport quicker, and I don't really like to stay in the airport unless it's like the shopping area or the food areas.
I really appreciated hearing all your guys' talk, and being born in America, it's often something I can say I don't even think of, and I definitely understand better now than I would have before how that process of becoming a citizen and extending that right to all humans across the world. And as you guys were speaking, I couldn't help but think of how advancements in the last 100 years has really, I think, kind of shifted us towards that more global perspective. I was thinking of, I think it was Voyager when it went to space and started taking the first pictures of Earth, and you could see for the first time what Earth looks like, and there's not like this color-coded border like we have in classrooms. Like it's just a globe, and it reminds us that we're all in this together, and we're all human beings on this Earth, and we all face the same struggles, and even though we're different, we're all one. Really, I think that's amazing. So I kind of just wanted to get your perspective if you think, like with all the advancements we have in technology and transportation, that we're now more global, do you think that's where we're moving in the future, or do you think we still face significant obstacles to become more of an idea that all humans deserve the same rights as we do?
Go for it.
You want me to?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that technologically, of course, we are making, as you said, immense strides, right? I think the problem is intellectually, mentally is the problem. That's where I think we have the barriers. National barriers have translated into mental barriers effectively. And the question is, can we break through? Can we learn that we are all one, we have all the same struggles, while at the same time being citizens of the countries that we are citizens of? And I think that those barriers are more enduring, unfortunately, than the technological ones.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying this will never happen. I'm just saying that I think it takes more time, and it takes a lot more education and a lot more thought about this stuff than normally people give it. Because normally, you know, we live what Camus calls the habits of life. Life is a habit. You get up in the morning, you get dressed, you go to work. Why would you think of citizenship? Doesn't make any sense. I mean, that's just silly unless you're not a citizen, at which point, of course, you have to think of citizenship, right?
I think two things. I think you're absolutely right. The intellectual gap is really hard to get past. And I always think of two examples. One is watching the Olympic Games. People expect you to root for one particular country, and somehow it's seen as wrong to say, well, I'm just rooting for all these different countries. It's so cool to see this country I've never heard of do really well, and somehow that's not seen as patriotic. Right. The other thing too that's going on now is the situation that has been happening in Syria. I just read an article in the Christian Science Monitor yesterday, where they went out and interviewed people about what they thought about the situation in Syria, and the quotes came up over and over again. It's unfortunate what's going on over there, but we have enough problems of our own to take care of. And like you said, it's an intellectual gap. There are no easy answers with the Syria situation. I don't pretend that I have an easy answer, but to think of it as this is something, you know, what was happening in Bosnia was happening over there. What's happening in Syria is happening over there. We have our own problems to take care of. Well, actually, it all is connected. In a way, but so I think you're right that the intellectual, and we make people think this way with our laws. We make people choose which airport line to go through. We make people give up one passport over another. To come back to your comment about don't forget where you come from, well, being American changes over time as well, what being American means.
Well, my family, even though they still have like the accent and everything like Jamaica,
Right.
I don't. They consider me American, which I don't have a problem with.
Right.
Because, you know, I grew up, so I know. But sometimes it can be a little awkward because they also have the accent and everything.
Right. I mean, if you had told a Chinese American, I don't know, 60 years ago, that takeout Chinese food would be seen as something American. Do you know what I mean? But it is American today to do takeout Chinese food. And so I think you're right that and not just to think about it in terms of cultural, not national, but that cultures change and cultures enrich each other. And I think that's something intellectually we find very hard. We want to make people stay in one box or another, but the most beautiful things are when things mingle and enrich each other. So,
We have another question or comment?
A comment. I don't think there's an intellectual gap that's holding things up. I think it's an emotional gap.
yeah.
And so for that reason, I'm a pessimist that will come together globally because of the emotional attachment people have and just people hanging on to things. And as much as I would like to see everybody coming together globally, there are still wars going on because of emotional ties, people fighting. You know, there's in America you hear the Hatfields and McCoys supposedly having feuds that go back centuries, supposedly. But there really are tribal feuds going on, from what I understand, in parts of the world that really do go back centuries, because of, something that happened generations upon generations ago. And that is due to emotions, not intellectual reasons.
Any other questions or comments?
I had a question about throughout all of the conference events that I've been to, there seems to be this overarching theme that one of the main ways we can solve most of the problems that were addressed is through education. And it comes up time and time again in so many of the ones that we've talked about, that everyone's been talking about. And it seems to fix either as a result of what happens from education, whether it be indirect or direct. And so if that is one of the main solutions, how do we take the steps, even though they will be small steps at first? What are those steps to increase education other than obviously going to school, building schools, what are other ways we can increase education in a global community?
Okay, I'm going to start with a story, and I don't want to put anybody down, but this is what happened in one of my introduction to American government classes this was a couple of semesters ago, and the census report results had just come out, and so I told my introduction to American government class, I said, they said that at least, definitely by 2050, that in the United States, all minorities taken together will be the majority, right? And so for the very first time, the current majority is going to be the minority. And there was an audible gasp from my class, followed by one person raising his hand and asking, "Oh my God, what can we do to prevent that?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, but maybe you should start procreating really fast."
And that's
Now,
what some
having
people
said
are
that,
doing.
Well, let me just say, I did add, please don't tell your parents and don't take any advice I just gave you. But here's the thing. In some ways, education, formal education, helps. Of course, it asks questions that you don't normally ask. It forces you to confront things you wouldn't normally confront. Having said that, I think as the United States becomes more diverse, you can't help being educated on multiple levels. Just your normal, everyday interactions. Now, you were just saying earlier that, I'm pessimistic because there are wars and feuds that have been going on over centuries, and I was just thinking, look, to a certain extent, we don't know if we can solve this. Is this human nature? Is this nurture? We don't know. If it's human nature to essentially congregate into small groups, then, well, we really can't prevent it. But having said that, I do think nurture helps. Even if it is nature, nurture helps, right? And so I think just being exposed to the world around us, I think will make a big difference. Personally, that's my belief. And this is why I worry about things like this echo chamber that I was talking about, where people just watch what they believe in, and they listen to the people that they already agree with, and they don't want to break out of that circle. I think that's the worst tendency we can have in a global world.
And take a liberal arts education seriously. That's a large part of heading towards a global education. Instead of coming to your advisor and saying, "Why do I have to take this? Because it's not part of my major." The mindset of what can I learn from these classes that I have never thought about before. I loved my liberal arts education. I really did. I was happy taking classes that were quote unquote irrelevant because they made me a better thinker. And it made me aware of all the different connections. And so, I think it starts with a very basic, I hear our politicians saying things like, we should make college 3 years, you should just take the classes you need and get a job. That, in my opinion, that's disastrous. It doesn't get us towards this kind of global connection if people are in all their little echo chambers and don't get out of it.
Time for a couple more. Anybody?
And Dr. Smith, that kind of reminds me of like a factory mentality
Yes.
rather than a learning mentality. Just a little
Sure
note,
enough.
like let's pump out the degrees as fast as we can, you know. But my question is really basic and technical. You all mentioned writing a sentence in English and reading it out loud. Last time I checked, we didn't really have an official language, so I mean, it kind of like, why is it in English? I mean, if we don't have an official language, like, have they ever addressed that discrepancy, or do they just?
No.
It's administrative.
Yeah.
It's just administrative. I mean, the whole thing is administrative, right? They decide this is a process you have to go through, what qualifies you, and I mean, they can always make the argument that, yes, sure, we don't have an official language, but really there is one language that predominates in this country, and you should know it for your own benefit. They can always make that argument.
True.
And so they don't need to, I don't think that we are not very well suited to philosophical
Right.
debate when it comes to political matters,
And
policy
they do not have a
matters.
sense of humor at immigration. I would like to clarify.
They don't.
They don't. But I will tell you that my sentence was, California is the state with the biggest population.
That was your sentence.
That was my sentence. You remember these things, you don't forget them, so.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick. I've been sitting back here the whole time and, talking about patriotism and things like that. I'm coming at this from a perspective that I'm serving in the military currently, so I've been in for like 5 years. And it's amazing to me that these concepts get looked over so easily. You talk to your average infantryman, he talks about the Hajj and hey, we got, we go out there on patrol and, take out whoever. And it's like, you're talking about human life. And there's a huge gap between, understanding that we are all connected and we all do. If you believe in the concept of inalienable rights and you're willing to step up and, fight for that, why is that such a leap to believe that all humans have that same inalienable right? But yet, I think, and the sad thing, I'm not a pessimist about it. I tend to agree with Dr. Bagchi. I really have a lot of hope for it. The fact that humans have the capacity at all to empathize is a great thing. But, I think that the reason is because humans have a tendency to take the easiest, the shortest path, to think in black and white. It's easy to think in black and white.
Right.
It's way harder to navigate the gray. And so, that's one of those things that is really challenging to wrestle with. But I don't know. I just thought it was interesting, the way I've encountered it in the military. It's definitely a whole different beast there. But yeah, I definitely value my liberal arts education for those reasons, for sure. So good, excellent point.
Great note to end on.